Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to be part of the ICB-MIS conference that's organized by Amity University, Dubai. My research study is actually on maintaining legitimacy and institutional cooptative analysis of a government-led green technology innovation scheme. So this research paper is actually part of a broader PhD study, and we have a few other papers that are related to this subject that we're currently working on. And this study in particular, though, focuses on an institutional way of looking at legitimacy. And the approach that we took was we looked at the institutional concept called cooptation, and we felt it would be great to present it here at this conference. And so thank you very much. And without further ado, I'm going to get started on the presentation. And I will basically take you through the background of the study. I'll highlight the overall aim and research issues as well as the literature review. I'll go into the methodology that was undertaken as well as the findings and the contributions. And so before I begin, I just wanted to provide you with the definitions of the theoretical concepts that are in play here. And so in the case of legitimacy, we are looking at Sushman's definition, which states it is a generalized perception or assumption that the actions of an entity are desirable, proper, or appropriate within some socially constructed system of norms, values, beliefs, and definitions. And in terms of cooptation, we're using Selznick's definition, which was brought forth back in 1949, which means absorbing new elements into the leadership or policy determining structure of an organization as a means of averting threats to its stability or existence. Like for example, one example of cooptation might be warranting transparency, for example, or showcasing positive work efforts that are implemented to show individuals or social actors the value for why support is key. And so in the case where a government is the author of a green technology innovation scheme, promoting it and championing its overall implementation and averting risk is absolutely critical. And there's a plethora of research out there on successful innovative technology adoption outcomes, but there is limited research on failed adoption or innovations that ultimately led to crises. And so while introducing innovation can compromise an institution's legitimacy, the question of how to maintain legitimacy in the face of an innovative imperative should in fact be an immediate and persistent concern for government institutions. And we explore Lee Plunkett Tost's integrative model of legitimacy judgments. And in that particular paper, Tost argues that legitimacy is critical in institutional research because it is a necessary component of institutionalization. So she further calls on more research on the micro-level dynamics of legitimacy by understanding not only the dynamics of an entity and rather the roles that individuals or social actors play in legitimacy processes. And so for the purpose of this research study, we ask, how do institutions maintain or regain legitimacy through averting risk? And so our objectives are basically to explore how a local government averts threats after the failed implementation and monitoring of a green technology innovation scheme. We expand and develop Tost's explanation of legitimacy use, and we identify dimensions of cooptation, and we develop the ideas of instrumental, relational, and moral evaluations by showing how these act as bases of legitimacy attacks. And then we form approaches to cooptation. So by addressing the research issues and the research aim, this research study attempts to move the conversation of institutional legitimacy and green technology innovation forward. In terms of the institutional setting, we look at the RHI scheme, which was implemented in Northern Ireland back in 2012. And basically, this scheme was set up to encourage businesses and the public sector to switch from fossil fuels to renewable sources. Now, unfortunately, The scheme had flaws in its implementation and monitoring, and that resulted in an estimated overspend of about £700 million, and this led to a financial crisis, deterioration in public confidence, and ultimately a collapse of a devolution government. And so in this case, while there's a large body of literature on the consumption side of innovation, it's really important for us to look at green innovation in times of crises and to draw on a socio-psychological institutional perspective to explore legitimacy and legitimation work. And in terms of the methodology, we actually inductively organized data into categories, and we identified patterns and relationships. We also depended on well-specified issues and multiple data sources, and we adopted a qualitative approach, an interpretivist approach predominantly. In this case, the main source of data was generated from the media articles and publications, and as well as government documents and accounts. And then the secondary source of data was collected through interviews. In terms of our data collection, at first we recreated the RHI scheme timeline just to kind of look at the main events that took place. We then conducted interviews. We started off by applying conversion interviews just so we can gauge what informants have to say. And then throughout, we were able to develop, validate, and refine the research questions. Throughout, after a few interviews, the interview structure became a bit more semi-structured, and that basically helped us ask the correct questions or the right questions in order to form our analyses. We conducted a total of 13 interviews, and we came up with about 31,000 words of data that we would then need to analyze. In terms of text and content, we had a large corpus of data surrounding the RHI scheme. So for example, media articles and publications came to approximately 1,900,000 words. And so it's a very large corpus of data, which is why for our data analysis of this content, we use semantic network analysis. This over here is an example of the RHI scheme that we actually put together. And it's actually, as you can see in red, those are the moments of attack when the government was attacked in terms of their legitimacy, or when their legitimacy was in question. And then the green parts are where the government ultimately, responded with cooptative measures. And what we did is we took those different these different milestones or different times or points of infliction, and we put them on this diagram over here. So as you can see, we've showcased when the attacks took place, and we've showed when the cooptative measures were taken by the government. And the lines show us our stability, when there was a bit of stability. So at first, when the scheme was first implemented, there was stability, but then after one attack, two attacks, three attacks, stability started getting impacted, and then ultimately there became instability, and the government was all of a sudden in repair mode. For data analysis, as I mentioned earlier, we adopted semantic network analysis, and we also looked at triangulation. So our interview protocol was triangulated with the semantic network analysis. For the semantic network analysis, we used a program called Legitimacy, which automatically analyzes text and it identifies high-level concepts. And this over here basically shows our triangulation. So we started off by collecting data from the field, which is basically data collection. And then we used Legitimacy as well as our interview protocol. We went back, consulted with theory, institutional work, legitimacy, cooptation, went back to the field to collect more data, and so on and so forth. These are I know you are not going to be able to read these very clearly, but those were the Legitimacy results that kind of came up. And as we see here, like from the media, we noticed that the media presented red flags during the crisis a lot more than normal. And due to the media's extensive reach, they were able to influence their readers and followers as a surrogate measure of the government's legitimacy. And so they reported both on legitimate and illegitimate activities. While the government, on the other hand, their documents focused more on the investigations that were taking place, as well as the claims and so on and so forth. And because of that, they attempted to manage their institution's own coverage by addressing the attacks and the influence that they had on legitimacy. In terms of our findings, we had two separate findings. So we had our semantic findings, which I showed earlier in terms of our Leximancer results, and we also had our thematic findings. So we noticed that the media and the government differentiated themselves in the way they addressed crises. The government strategically framed their communication in regards to the crisis at hand. They emphasized their apologetic stance, and this is basically a form of cooptation. They employed communication strategies that showed how they were taking actions to legitimize and address the threats proactively. They also began to take ownership of the crisis at hand once things kind of got out of control to try to slowly regain trust. The media, on the other hand, they reported facts around the crisis, and there were so many different media platforms and representations as well that presented and discussed the RHI crisis. And they also looked at it from its foundation as well as the issues. So given Tost's explanation of legitimacy use, we found that a government can be both a commissioner and a regulator by learning about the technical and political user experience behind the Green Technology Innovation Scheme. They're also able to warrant transparency through open and translucent debate in times of crises. They can showcase accountability by providing accessible information, as well as take responsibility for mistakes by showcasing trust signals. So in a time of a crisis, when a government adopts those cooptative measures, then they are able to actually regain their followers' trust and regain the general public's trust. And this is quite imperative and essential for cooptation in order for governments to recover from crises. So our contributions are basically, we expand Tost's explanation of legitimacy use, specifically by identifying dimensions of cooptation. We also develop her ideas of instrumental, relational, and moral evaluations, and we showed how these can act as the basis of legitimacy attacks, and again formed cooptative approaches, and we showed ultimately how a government can repair and reassess their situation during or amidst a crisis. And we show how this process shifts towards legitimation once cooptative measures are applied. That basically concludes my presentation. So thank you very much for listening in. I hope you found it beneficial. I put my email address on here. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them. And thank you again to the ICBMIS team for hosting this conference and for having me. And I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentations. Thanks again.